Our next speaker is a representative from Class 5, Social Sciences, Robert Seyfarth. He's professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, and the title of his talk is Baboon Metaphysics, the Evolution of a Social Mind.
Thanks very much for asking me. In 1838, roughly 20 years before he would publish The Origin of Species, Charles Darwin began to realize that his theory of evolution by natural selection, originally designed to explain the evolution of morphological structures like the beak of a finch, could also be used to explain the evolution of mind and thinking. He wrote in his M notebook, M for Metaphysics, "We can thus trace causation of thought. It obeys the same laws as other parts of structure." A few pages later, he said, "Origin of man is now proved. Metaphysics must flourish. He who understands the baboon would do more toward metaphysics than Locke." Darwin's remark, his challenge really, brings us to the modern study of social behavior, thinking, and communication in non-human primates. I'm going to talk a bit today about work on the social behavior of baboons in the Okavango Delta of Botswana. This is work that I've conducted for many years jointly with my wife, Dorothy Cheney, who's also a professor at Penn and a member of the National Academy. I'm going to mention briefly a little bit of work on chimpanzees in West Africa. Just to give you a bit of reminder about the evolutionary background, baboons are old world monkeys that shared a common ancestor with the ancestor of modern humans roughly 25 million years ago. So they're close, but not the closest animal relatives to us. The closest animal relatives are the African great apes, chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas, with whom we shared a common ancestor as recently as 5 million years ago. I got into this field when, as a completely naive tabula rasa undergraduate, I took a course that was entitled Man's Place in Nature. That dates both it and me. And other people took this course because they thought it was going to be easy. I took it and I was hooked. And I majored in biological anthropology. And after graduation, I was lucky enough to have two fantastic mentors. For graduate school, Robert Hind at Cambridge University, one of the founders of the systematic study of social behavior of primates, and as a postdoctoral scientist with Peter Marler at Rockefeller University. Peter brought Dorothy and me right into the middle of the revolution in cognitive science and psychology, bringing all these different fields together. So we study baboons, and we did for 16 years with this one troop of baboons by getting up in the morning, either we, our research assistants, our postdocs, or us, and we follow the baboons as they forage through their environment throughout the day. We collect data on their social behavior, who does what to whom. We tape record their vocalizations, we record where they are in the environment, and so on. And in addition to this observation of behavior and vocalizations, we collect from each one of the adults in our group, about 30 individuals, a weekly fecal sample from which we can extract information about glucocorticoids, a measure of stress, and also information about DNA. And so this provides us a running tally of what affects individuals and what stresses them. Just to give you an idea of the social background, baboons live throughout Africa in multi-male groups composed of kin and non-kin. There typically are 25 to 30 adult females, 12 to 15 adult males, and their offspring. When a male reaches roughly sexual maturity around 6 or 7, he leaves the group where he was born and joins another group. And males may move from group to group throughout their lives 3, 4, or 5 times. Females, on the other hand, remain in the group where they were born throughout their lives, and they maintain close relationships with their mothers and their matrilineal sisters. If you came out with us watching baboons and you took the 6 weeks or so that it takes to learn to recognize all 60 or 70 individuals individually, you'd soon notice that there was one female who, as she moves through the group, other animals sort of step aside. It's not that this female is more aggressive, she's just deferred to. And if you stayed on and watched for 2 or 3 more years, you'd realize that this female's offspring acquire dominance ranks immediately below those of their mothers. So the core of the group, the females and the young animals, are arranged in a hierarchy of matrilineal families that runs from the highest ranking female in the highest ranking family down to the lowest ranking individual in the lowest ranking family. There are close bonds among kin, lots of grooming, lots of tolerance at food sources, formation of aggressive alliances, and the relationships in a way are simultaneously cooperative and competitive. Animals make sure that they maintain their family's dominance rank, but they also cooperate with all the other individuals in the group. Baboons are what biologists call a low-skew species. It's not like a group of wolves where only the alpha male and the alpha female breeds. All of these females are giving birth to offspring, and all the families are growing, some a little bit faster than others. So there's low reproductive skew, and there's also some paternal investment by the males. So this is a really interesting, complex social structure, but these categories of behavior, matrilineal kin groups, linear dominance hierarchy, these are human categories that we developed to explain the patterns that exist in our data. What we really want to know, on the other hand, is do these categories exist for baboons? Does a baboon recognize other individuals' family groups? Do they recognize the rank relations of others? And we test hypotheses about what baboons know about each other using experiments in which we hide a loudspeaker in a bush, play the vocalizations of certain individuals, and see how the listeners respond. And we know from these experiments that baboons do recognize the close associates that exist among other families. For example, if there are a bunch of females foraging in an area and you hide a speaker in a bush and play the distress scream of one of the female's offspring, the other females will look at the mother, as if to say, that scream goes with that juvenile goes with you, what are you going to do about it? And through a variety of experiments, we know that baboons recognize the close associates that exist among others. They also seem to recognize other animals' dominance rank. So female, for example, ranked 6, not only knows where she stands relative to others, but she also knows how they stand relative to each other. For example, if you play a vocalization that suggests that female ranked 4 is fighting with female rank 5, and female 5 is screaming, that doesn't elicit very strong response because it's what normally happens. But if you go to your library of calls and create a sequence that makes it sound like 5 is threatening 4 and 4 is screaming, that produces an enormous response. It's what psychologists call the violation of expectation response. And it shows that a female recognizes not only her own status, but also the status that exists among others. And finally, through another experiment, you can show that females combine their knowledge of matrilineal kin groups and linear dominance hierarchies because they respond much more strongly to a rank reversal that occurs between two families than to a rank reversal that occurs within families. So they're combining this sophisticated social knowledge. So why do they have this knowledge? What's it good for? Why is natural selection favored individuals with such a sophisticated picture of their social companions? Well, when we started this and so I should say before I start that what this means is that for baboons, the recognition of individuals is not just, oh, that's Fred, the recognition of an individual by itself. It's the recognition of an individual and that individual's place in society as a member of a matrilineal kin group and a particular dominance hierarchy. And this is interesting because there's a great deal of interest in the social sciences right now in the way in which humans classify individuals on the basis of some external feature, race or apparent social class or whatever. This is what baboons do. And long before there was culture or language or any of the complicated things in our society, baboons classify each other according to the subgroup to which they belong. So why do they have this sophisticated knowledge? What's the advantage? Well, when we first started this long-term study, of course we wanted to find out what makes a successful baboon. Which females have a survival and reproductive advantage over others? And we and our colleagues doing other such studies had always thought that it was going to be the females at the top of the hierarchy, that rank would make a difference. And rank does provide some advantages, but they're relatively unimportant. What really matters to females is something else, and that is how close your bonds are with other females, the strength and stability of your friendships. Here's an example of the data that shows this. So this is a survivorship curve for infants up to age 15 years. And we've taken the infants' mothers and divided them into three categories: those with the strongest social bonds with other females, those with the weakest social bonds with other females, and those in the intermediate third. And what you can see is that that females with strong social bonds, which are not necessarily the highest ranking females, have a survival advantage transferred to their infants. And this is really interesting because a female baboon starts feeding independently when she's about 1 year of age, and she starts breeding about 5 or 6. So as a young adult, your survival, what determines it more than anything else is how close your mother's bond is with other females. It's almost a psychological advantage. This is really interesting, and it turns out to be something that's being discovered in lots and lots of group-living mammals, much to the surprise of all of the investigators involved. There are adaptive, long-term bonds not directly related to reproduction in many different species, among males in chimpanzees and dolphins and macaques, and among females in hyenas, horses, and elephants. So the importance of long-term bonds is extremely important. It also mirrors data from humans, where one of the best predictors of longevity in humans is how strong and stable your social network is. There are a couple of other things I want to say about these long-term social bonds. And the first is that individual baboons are strongly motivated to maintain and repair their social relationships and social networks. One of the ways that baboons establish and maintain social relationships is by grunting to each other. If you've walked around with a bunch of baboons, the most common vocalization you hear is a simple grunt. And what I've done in the next slide is given you pictures of 6 of our females. Next to each picture is a sonogram of 2 of that female's grunts. And if you could play the file now. So you can see that the grunts are individually distinctive, and the females use these grunts the way we use conversation, to sort of grease the social wheels. If one female is approaching another and the approaching female grunts, there's much more likely to be subsequent friendly interaction, grooming, whatever, and much less likely to be an aggressive interaction like a supplant. So the idea here, current theory supports, is that whenever 2 individuals come together, there's uncertainty about the outcome, because the best strategy for one depends on what the other does, and vice versa. Grunts remove this uncertainty, because grunts are honest predictors, honest signals of what the individual who's approaching intends to do. And so grunt removes the uncertainty and facilitates interaction. It's not that grunts are a sort of automatic response, though. Females are selective in how they use grunts. It turns out that mothers and daughters who have the closest social relationships don't grunt very often. Again, the idea is that their relationships are quite predictable, and they don't have much uncertainty about them, so they don't need grunts, whereas other animals do. What happens when a relationship is disrupted? Well, predation is the most common cause of adult mortality in our group, predation particularly by lions and leopards. And predation is really stressful to the baboons in the group, particularly if you lose a close relative or a close friend. So here on the y-axis is the change in fecal glucocorticoid levels, back to those fecal samples, for females who lost a relative or control females. And you can see that the increase in glucocorticoids is higher for females who lost a close relative. What do the females do? They've lost their closest social companions. Do they become loners? Do they become depressed? Surprisingly, they don't. What they do is they increase their grooming over what they would have done if they hadn't lost a relative. So females take active steps to befriend others, to form new friendships that make up for the one that they just lost. And finally, on to chimpanzees now. It looks like for chimpanzees, close bonds are emotionally rewarding. This is work by two former postdocs of ours, Kathy Crockford and Roman Wittig. And what they did is they followed chimpanzees in Uganda around for about 18 months. And every chance they got, they collected a urine sample from a chimpanzee. Then they went back, and from the urine sample, they can extract measures of oxytocin. And you all know that oxytocin is the love hormone. It's associated with bonding, trust, friendship. And they went back then and looked at all the samples that came right after a bout of grooming, and they compared the levels of oxytocin. So baseline levels, when there isn't any grooming, are pretty low. Non-bond, when you're grooming with a non-bond partner, oxytocin doesn't go up much. But when you're grooming with a relative or an individual with whom you have a close bond, oxytocin goes up enormously. So these social relationships for chimpanzees, as far as we can measure it, are reinforcing. They're pleasurable. So where are we? We now know, in answer to Darwin's challenge, that primates are skilled social voyeurs. They know a lot about each other. And this social knowledge is adaptive because it helps individuals form stable, long-term bonds with particular others. And these bonds, as in humans, can influence health, stress, and fitness. They've been favored by natural selection. And we can't explain this according to things like kinship and dominance rank. And what this tells us is that long before tools, language, or culture, primates had a sophisticated knowledge of what seems to be the most important and complicated part of their environment, and that is other primates. Where do we go from here? Well, what exactly makes social bonds so adaptive, both for these animals and for humans? How does it work? What is it about having a close friend that is not only emotionally rewarding, but in baboons helps increase your reproductive success? We just don't know enough about the mechanisms yet. And I've been talking about what primates as a group can do, but now we want to look at individual differences. Surely there are some baboons that are more socially successful than others. They form better friendships. Their friendships translate into reproductive success. What causes these individual differences? Is it skill, some sort of motivation, something to do with personality? Is it just the luck of having your family members survive? There's beginning to be some really interesting work on the epigenetic effects of social isolation and stress. But I should emphasize that if these research projects are going to succeed, they're going to have to succeed by studying primates in their natural social environment, which means going into the field and following them in the environment where they actually live. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
We have time for one or two questions. Yes.
Robert, that was a great talk. Thank you. I have a comment and then a question. The comment is, in human learning, the underpinnings of cognitive and language development are now so linked to social. I mean, this connection between social behavior and the acquisition of higher order thinking and language is very, very strong, so it's fun to see it here. And the question is, how about baby baboons? How early in development, or have you studied that yet? How early in development do you see signs of this social connection? I mean, in human infants, you see things like eye gaze following coming in very early and supporting all of this other learning that kids are doing.
We've just begun to understand the extent of social knowledge in adult baboons, and there hasn't really been much developmental work at all about how this kicks in for infants, how infants learn about this. There's no doubt that infants have to learn an enormous amount about their social environment. After all, new males are coming in, new infants are being born elsewhere in the group, and they slot them into these different families. It's an open area for work.
You spoken quite a bit about how the female baboons interact with one another and establish a social hierarchy. There was nothing about the males who would come in as outsiders from a group and have to establish some kind of a pecking order, for want of a better word. Can you tell us something about how the males deal with each other?
Sure. We know less about males because often the males in our study group, unfortunately, leave. And it's very hard to follow them.
Must come in, I presume.
And then the new ones come in, but we don't know anything about their history. So it makes it a little bit more difficult. But here's what we know about males. Males come in, and their strategies of competing with other males for a place in the male dominance hierarchy, which is separate from the female hierarchy. Males are much bigger than females. Their strategy involves alliances with other males, long sort of back and forth between other individuals. Some males come in right away and move to the top. Others work their way up. Males seem to switch ranks a lot during their lifetime. There's also occasional infanticide when the males come in. It's a very complicated world that the males live in. We've done experiments on what males know about the ranks of other males, and they know just as much as the females do about the ranks of females, even though the male ranks are changing often. So they're keeping track of what's going on. And there are some other experiments suggesting that when a male is mating with a female, other males are monitoring that relationship. And if the pair drift apart spatially, the other males will come in and try and mate with the female. So there's a lot going on with males, and I just haven't talked about it today.
Okay, one more quick question. Use the mic.
In one of your earlier graphs showing the survival of offspring of strong versus intermediate and weak females, there seemed to be a crossing of the graphs between the strong and intermediate females, maybe at year 5 or 6 or something like that. Is there an interesting explanation for that?
No, there's a dull explanation for that, and that is sample size. After all, if you get on towards the tail end of the lifespan of the animals, the sample goes down. And so we don't know whether that's a genuine phenomenon.
Okay. Thank you, Robert. Great talk.